So I can't wait to hear what she will share with us. Now, throughout the program these past 2 days, we've been hearing a lot from public sector officials and heads of economic zones and economic zone associations and other entities geared towards attracting investment. But there is a crucial voice that we need to have in these conversations, and that, of course, is that of the private sector. So Marguerite is well placed as a top executive in a large multinational corporation, but also active in a number of various business groups and initiatives. So Marguerite, first of all, welcome.
Yeah, buenas tardes, Barcelona. Buenas tardes, Cordy. Hello, nice to be with you.
Great. Now you're making me look bad by showing your Spanish skills. But we will do this for my sake in English. Well, I know you're an extremely busy person, so we're grateful for your time. Just to start things off, I'd like to know, how has it been for you as a business leader to navigate through this time of turmoil and crisis?
I think that what we saw that was before the COVID pandemic hit us last year, March, February, that we already were living in a world which was full of change. And those changes were, whether it was already on cyber, whether it was climate change, whether it was regulatory circumstances, you name it. There were already a lot of changes happening. But once the pandemic hit us, everything accelerated. Suddenly, we were all in the world of digital transformation. I don't think I could have ever imagined all of us suddenly being used to sit at home, to work at home, to be able to get your computer going yourself. I'm not sure how many people are aware, but normally in the office, you are surrounded by your tech guys who help you, or girls, when something goes wrong. And now you had to suddenly all do it yourself. So a tremendous time of change. And I think it's become more important not only to be very intelligent, which of course all of us are in business, but also to become very emotional intelligent, to be able to also adapt to change. So I've always said IQ is important, EQ is important, but definitely AQ, the adaptability to adapt to change, has become more and more prominently important the past year.
Well, on the subject of emotional intelligence, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's often said that female business leaders have strengths in emotional intelligence. Do you buy into that? Is that an oversimplification? Do you think it's even helpful to think in those terms?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, men and women need to do it together in business. And while we still have there's still some barriers to overcome to make sure there are as many women as men in the business. And there's some very good speakers who speak about it, that, in principle, statistically, it cannot be right that only men are at the moment still the majority of business leaders at the top. We all know that statistics and data and facts are very important nowadays. So I think that we need to take some barriers to make the equality come into a better manner. But back to empathy, you're talking here about empathy. It is proven that we've seen that leaders need to have capabilities, and those capabilities might differ at different times. And it's important as a leader to have a command and control leadership capability. That might be defined as a very masculine capability. But it's also important to have empathy when needed. And the past year, what has become very apparent, that you need to have, you need to have empathy in order to liaise and to engage with your workforce. And never ever before it has become so apparent that talent is scarce. Talent is important. Your employees are your human capital. Your employees are the most important thing in the survival of your company. Next, of course, liquidity. Let's make that also not a fact. And I have quoted, I think I even quoted this before to you, Courtney. I've quoted a quote from Doug, the former CEO of Campbell's Soup. And he actually said, in order to be successful in the marketplace, you need to be successful in the workplace first. And that has really become very apparent the past year. So you need to have all of those certain capabilities. And if you talk about who has them, men or women, yes, sometimes we call them masculine, sometimes we call them feminine. If you take a look also at the research from Volkmann and Zenger, they've identified 19 leadership capabilities. And they actually identified that, men and women aren't that far from each other. Women were outperforming men in 17 out of the 19. but men were sometimes better in strategy and STEM. But I think, at the end, if you're a leader, you need to have all possible capabilities in order to use them whenever the time asks you to do so.
Well, on this topic, if we stay for just a moment on the gender equality topic, you are the Netherlands country representative for the G20 Empower initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what its aims are?
Yeah. So everybody knows what the group of 20 is, the G20. This year, Italy was the chair of the G20. Mario Draghi was the chair. And for the first time in the history of the G20, Mario Draghi actually put the topic of women empowerment on the agenda of those ministers from all around the globe. And as you know, later this month they will gather in Rome, they will gather in Italy. And he put that topic on the agenda because he thought it was important. If you take a look at the economic recovery plan, which Italy at the moment has accepted, and they've received 191.5 billion euros from the European Commission, and Mario Draghi and Elena Bonetti have actually dedicated 7 billion of that to gender equality. And why has he done so? Because he reckons that if you increase the labor participation of women in the labor process, and that's in Italy particularly low, it's only 53% compared to 67% across Europe. If he increases that, Banco Italia has calculated that this will add 7% to 700 basis points to the gross national product of Italy. And he reckons it's not only an economic reason to do so, but also a social reason, because you would like to make the world more equal. So he has really put some targets in place for Italy to excel the coming years on this specific topic. And that was discussed at the G20. The G20 came together with the ministerial conference in Italy, Santa Margherita Ligure, fantastic location. And what we did for that day, we discussed what's going on around the globe, what happened the past year. We've seen some professions where indeed, women were negatively disadvantaged because of the pandemic, made redundant, had to spend more time at home taking care of their family, of their children, of their parents, etc. And what the G20 has discussed actually is to take a look at how can we put some best practices in place to help companies, to help the private and the public sector to overcome inequality. And we discussed, for example, which you will all reckon, data is key measure to improve. So we need more data to improve in order to measure what's going on. You need to take a very close look at the talent pipeline. Take a look what's going on with digital. Take a look how to upskill and reskill our workforce. I think that's maybe one of the most prominent topics for all of us, private and public sector at the moment. Lots of changes being upon us. How do we make sure our workforce, with their talents, stays aligned with how the society and the environment has developed? And last but not least, we also discuss how we can attract more women to STEM, which is still a big challenge. Science, technology, engineering, math are not always the automatic topics which women or girls are interested in.
Well, when you think around the topic of targets, do you think there should be firm enforcement in the way of government quotas and actual enforcement action? And where's the balance between sticks and carrots when it comes to governments trying to incentivize companies to do better on equality targets?
We've seen that quota laws have been implemented in a number of countries across Europe. Amongst others, Germany has one now, Italy, Belgium, France, Norway was one of the first. It depends on what kind of level. So the Netherlands, we last week accepted our quota law, which is applicable for listed companies for the supervisory boards only. So it's a quota of 33% women. For listed companies, which are approximately 100 in the Netherlands in those supervisory boards. I'm very much in favor of these kind of measures if things don't improve. So we've had some efforts to improve the numbers in the Netherlands. It didn't work out. And then at some point you have to make a firm decision to move the needle forward. And it's not easy. It's also not what I would have preferred, but I'm definitely in favor of it. And we've seen also that in some other countries it's actually proven. There was a law already in place. Again, in Italy, I'm happy now to be a little bit more common with the Italian circumstance, because I was, of course, talking to Minister Elena Bonetti on the topic. In Italy, they already had a law in place. They improved the number from 30% in 2019 to 40%, so from 30% to 40% women on boards. And this is the interesting part. While Italy has a very low participation rate of women in the labor process, only 53%, in boards, the number of women are already there. And also, if you take a look at the gender pay gap, the gender pay gap is never, ever, is the lowest in Italy. Across whole of Europe, Italy has the lowest gender pay gap on board. So what's so interesting about all of these things, if you compare them, Courtney, that you see that there are best practices in various different countries from which we can learn and where we could learn from each other to apply them. And that was the big purpose of the G20, to globally align on the topic, to take a look what's going on, how should it relate, what can we do to help each other, how can we improve. And how can we also improve, for example, countries like Japan? In Europe, we can discuss this openly, and we have a very open culture towards these kind of discussions. In Japan, and we saw it also recently at the Olympics, the culture is still a lot more conservative. And the position of women is still a lot more different, just like India. India, only 12% of women work. So I think what's most important, what was my most insightful lesson learned from this conference and from the previous discussions and all the plenary sessions we've had, don't generalize too quickly, stay curious, and try to find the spots which might make a difference in a certain country or a certain industry, which might help to move the needle forward.
Yes, the generalizations are difficult. There was a report out yesterday that the gender pay gap in the UK, for example, has widened, and that is in a place that considers itself quite advanced and liberal on these metrics. Well, if we broaden out gender equality as one, I guess, strand of ESG as a whole, and most companies now at least feel they need to pay some lip service, if nothing else, to ESG. But how can companies make sure that they are actually walking the walk instead of just talking the talk on ESG?
Yeah. Now, for everybody on the call, ESG stands for environmental, social governance. And while this is a terminology, also SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, which is very common to ourselves in Europe, we're having the green taxonomy, etc. I was actually earlier this week in a board meeting of Harvard Business School where I was with my alumni board. And the question was posed in a poll by one of the speakers, which was Richard Steele. He wrote the book Elevated Economics. What does SDG represent? Do you recognize the word SDG? And I was shocked to learn that more than 70% of the audience did not know what it meant. And why I'm trying to say this to you, so we need to be very cautious, because for some of us, intellectual, maybe more advanced economies, the word ESG is very common. We know, we heard it, we're going to work with it. So for some others, still not. So that's the first remark I would like to make. And even with advanced economies like with the US, the board of Harvard Business School alumni board, majority is actually from the US. So now that's the first remark. Second, if you look at environmental social governance, we're a few weeks away from COP26. COP26 is the big climate change conference taking place this year in Glasgow, where all the people from government, private sector, NGOs are gathered to take a look what's happening and how should we adjust, adapt, and move forward with actions. I think that all of us are in the meantime aware that the E for environmental is extremely important. So, but that one is also for companies, back to the private sector, how to deal with that is one of the most difficult ones. Because if you take a look at the big companies, they know that they can make a big impact if Shell does something, or BP, there is more. But if you're a small, medium enterprise, what can you do? And I think that there is for us now, there is an educational exercise for governments and private enterprises laid out in order to make more people aware of what they can do individually and collectively to help on climate change and to help on sustainable development goals. Now then, back to the S from social. Diversity and inclusion and equality, we just discussed it already, is part of social. And for me, that one is one of the easiest to address. Because with the pandemic last year, with racial injustice in the US, with what's going on in the world, we know that this is, a lot of laws have actually equal treatment in their constitution. In the Netherlands, in our constitution, equal treatment is part of our constitution. So we know we should make sure that things are better. We know we have to act on that. It's not that difficult. It requires guts. It requires boldness, brilliance to get it done. But it can be done. And for me, that one is an easier to get done than climate change, where it's really much more tougher to take a look. How can we do this individually and collectively? Because it's so complex to take a look what's going on with carbon at zero. How can we do that? And how do we do that? How do we transition our physical risks in the new world without any fossils? Now, then back to the G for governance. Governance is, of course, also including risk management. That's what we do at Aon. We look at risks, try to, minimize risk, mitigate risk, etc., identify risk in order for SMEs and entrepreneurs and bigger companies and individuals to actually to operate, to do their work. So if I look at it combined, it's for me the topic on the boardroom, in the boardroom at the moment. It's something you cannot hide away from. And it is really important to take a look how you can embrace this topic into a manner which is for you livable, which is explainable, which is reputational wise the right thing to do, and which indeed helps the world to become a better place.
Well, if we stick with risk for a moment, what are the threats that you see to any global recovery? I mean, both for your own company in which you work, but in the corporate sector in general. And what are the things that, as a business leader, keep you up at night?
Now, at the moment, what you're seeing is that the risk I see is we already covered talent. So for me, talent is a big risk. If we don't make sure talent is correctly, skilled, we have an issue. But if you take a look what's going on in the world, I think the raising gas prices today, it was in the news, the gas prices are raising extraordinarily fast. It has an impact to the world economy if suddenly individual households are being faced with excessive gas prices, which they haven't expected, which they're not expecting, which they have to build in their local budgets. Every individual of us here, I'm sitting in my house here at home, working from home still. And of course, I've put on my gas and my warm heating. You're in Spain, maybe it's not necessary there yet, but we've put them already here. It was a horrible day today with lots of rain. And so if those prices are dramatically going up, it affects, each and every individual household, what they can spend, so that's a threat, I think. What another threat is, if we take a look at cyber, you've seen what happened this week with WhatsApp, Facebook, when there was a blackout. I'm not sure whether it was, the question here is what's a human failure, because Facebook described it as a human failure. Then the question is what is a human failure in this one, but let's not go into detail that's too far away. But I think it's important to take a look that we've become very dependent, I'm not saying totally dependent, on exchanging information via these kind of channels. And if those channels are suddenly no longer there, what's happening? There's a threat for all of us, like how do we maintain calm in society? So cyber, then, all the increase in hacks we've seen in the past as well, the past year. Back to the pandemic, I think that we've seen how vulnerable and volatile we are together if things happen suddenly which we didn't expect to come our way. And we might have seen this coming our way because of the Spanish flu and you name all those things which have happened, SARS, but we didn't. And somehow we haven't anticipated it. And I think it's important for all of us to take a look at the scenarios which can take place, whatever scenarios. So scenario planning and putting alternative solutions in place is important. And I think that's what we all are about, to make sure that we actually gather the data, look at what's possible, take a look at the risks, and ensure that we have, that we make all of us enable us to make better decisions and more informed decisions.
I want to return for a moment to the issue of talent, because that's critical to you from what you've been discussing. And through these kind of difficult times, how do you think companies have done in supporting their workforces and adapting to new ways of working? And has that permanently changed?
Yeah. So when COVID happened, it's interesting to watch that. I'm now a firm believer that real change, the best way to make it happen is to have it happen by thunder and lightning. COVID hit us, and suddenly all of us were sitting at home, working from home. And so I'm a firm believer that this drove a change which we otherwise would not have seen for another 10 years at least. So in that respect, now then the question is, what do you make out of it? And yeah, I think it's important, Courtney, that we all take a look. How can we positively look at what happened, and how can we make it? How can we make sure that our talent in our firm, indeed, that it's the right talent?
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to make sure that we attract them at as soon as we can. That we make sure that they
Mm-hmm.
stay attracted to the purpose of our companies. Um, I think that more and more the generations which are now entering university or are entering the workforce
Mm-hmm.
have another understanding of how they would like to live their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So I've worked my life, I've worked my butt off, as I say, apologies for the language, in order to come where I am. And my kids say, yeah, mom, yeah, do something nice. Even my parents now say from time to time, relax and do something nice, and health is important. Um, and so it's important to balance all of this. I think it's important to make sure that the talent is attracted to the companies, that they see
Mm-hmm.
that the company which is they're working for, that it mirrors society.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that you offer the right skill base to the workforce, so that you take a look if the skill base are no longer up to date with the time of the state of the art as it should be, then
Mm-hmm.
offer them reskilling and upskilling.
Okay, and we're coming close to the end of our discussion, but I do want to ask on behalf of a lot of the participants in this event, and the viewers are public sector entities looking to attract investment and to collaborate
Yeah.
with large corporations like Aon. What do you need and want from them?
Yeah, so I was looking at um, I think that it's very important that we collaborate. So I think that the old and the new world needs to collaborate in order to create a better world and to create better decisions. And we need each other. All the old world, the old companies, we have skill. The
Mm-hmm.
smaller companies, the young companies, the tech companies, whatever, it's insurtech, legal tech, you name it. Any tech company, they have speed, they have creativity, they have perseverance, they have thinking outside the box, and we need to mingle those words together. And I think this is what, if you ask me what did we learn the past years, and this is also a study from HBS, I'm going to call this out because it's really interesting. Which is, I was reading an article of HBS, Harvard Business School, and they were giving four characteristics of leaders
Mm-hmm.
to get through the crisis. And the four they said was like decide with speed over precision. I really like that one. So
Mm-hmm.
decide with speed over precision. And this is in big companies, we still have the thought process, maybe failure is no option.
Mm-hmm.
While in the smaller tech companies, it's fail early, fail smart. And we need to have both. You need to
Mm-hmm.
be able to fail. Adapt boldly. So early decide what you do, but also early decide what you will not do.
Mm-hmm.
Deliver reliably, always important. And engage for impact. And I have to say, this has really stuck with me the past weeks
Mm-hmm.
after I read that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting because you feel it's a combination of two worlds. It's the
Mm-hmm.
small companies, the techs, and the big companies. And the old and new world together needs to collaborate in order to make the future a better place.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, and there's scope for public sector to support, I suppose, big and small companies in those endeavors.
Yeah, and I think that this is, if you want to, this is maybe the biggest secret to success at the moment, Courtney, that we as a public and a private sector need to cooperate. And this is what and you already, you refer to the G20 Empower.
Mm-hmm.
The G20 Empower is a combination of people from public, so the
Mm-hmm.
ministers from the public governments, but also the private sector, representatives like myself from companies, to discuss together
Mm-hmm.
what we can do. And what you see is that private sector, we always, at some end, we would like to act,
Mm-hmm.
So, we would like to act fast, think carefully, but act fast and make it happen. And this is where sometimes the private sector can learn, the public sector can learn, because
Mm-hmm.
from time to time, they might be a little bit, resistant to change. And we say, come on, let's. So I think it's up to us together to make the private and the public sector to engage in discussions,
Mm-hmm.
to think about the differences we see, but also similarities, to
Mm-hmm.
cross the bridge together to each other, to get things going. Especially now with all the trillions being spent also in
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure and family
Mm-hmm.
plans, also in the US,
Mm-hmm.
it's important to collaborate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a great note to end on, although I wish I could pick your brain on a whole lot more topics, but hopefully we'll have another opportunity. Well, Marguerite, your kids told you they wanted you to take a break and relax a bit, so we're going to let you do that now, or at least let you off the hook here. We thank you again for your time and sharing your really valuable insights. I know it will be appreciated by all of our viewers. And thank you again to BNU and Barcelona Free Zone for allowing me to lead this session and other sessions here in what has been an extremely interesting day discussing big topics around the global economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Courtney. I told you yesterday you were a lifesaver. I'm repeating it now because you are. So I'll see you tomorrow.
My pleasure. Yes, thank you.
See you tomorrow. Nosotros de momento nos despedimos. A las 6 en punto vais a poder seguir otro Inspirational, es el de Luis Quevedo, un periodista científico que nos va a ofrecer la ponencia You Can Stop the Collapse of Civilization. Nosotros volvemos aquí al plató mañana ya a las 11 con más topics sobre las Economic Zones.